The resistance continued, but Ernest Green's graduation was an important moment for the civil rights movement. Emmett Till's generation was going to college, and a new chapter in the struggle for equal justice was about to begin.
Segregation been here from time to time, but we just ain't gonna pay no mind. It's moving on. It's moving on.
I am Ben West, and this is my city. For the past 10 years, I have been its mayor. I have watched it grow from an overgrown country town into a great metropolitan complex.
Nashville was proud of its progressive tradition. A center for education, the arts, and industry, it had long promoted itself as the Athens of the South. But Nashville, like most southern cities, was segregated. Attracted by the city's 4 black colleges, many young people arrived from other parts of the country and encountered their first experience with segregation.
I was looking forward in college to really expanding myself and growing. I was taking those kinds of issues very seriously. And that played quite a part when I got to Nashville in why I so keenly resented segregation and not being allowed to do basic kinds of things like eating at restaurants in the 10-cent stores.
Looking for a way to fight segregation, Diane Nash and other students were drawn to activist Jim Lawson and his workshops in nonviolent direct action.
And that is to try to have one major role-playing experience which sort of tries to set the stage for an actual demonstration, for an actual sit-in.
When Jim Lawson came to the city, he began to organize students, right? And most important to that for both students and we who were ministers was that we had workshops. And the workshops in nonviolence made the difference. We began to understand the philosophy behind it, the tactics, the techniques, how to, in fact, begin to take the blows and still respond with some sense of dignity.
Nigger! Nigger!
Nashville students would be motivated by an event that took place in Greensboro, North Carolina. On February 1st, 1960, 4 black college students sat down at a lunch counter reserved for whites and refused to leave. It was a direct challenge to Southern law and tradition.
Well, it's just not the things we're used to down here. I mean, they come in and they sit down, and we're not used to them sitting down beside us, because I wasn't raised with them. I never have lived with them, and I'm not going to start now.
As the sit-in spread across the country, John Lewis, Angela Butler, and Diane Nash led students to Nashville's first sit-in.
The students were dressed like they were on the way to church. We went into the local stores. These stores were known all across the South, and for the most part, all across the country. We took our seats in a very orderly, peaceful fashion. We stayed there at the lunch counter studying and preparing our homework because we were denied service. The manager ordered that the lunch counters be closed, that the restaurants be closed. We just sit there, and we continue to sit all day long.
The sit-ins continued without incident for almost 2 weeks. Then, on February 27th, a warning. Gangs of toughs were gathering downtown. The students sat in as planned. The police did nothing to protect them. The students remained true to their strategy of nonviolence. When the police vans arrived, more than 80 demonstrators were arrested and charged with disorderly conduct.
The day that the police first arrested us, they announced to us, okay, all you niggers, get up from the lunch counter and, you know, or we're going to arrest you. And their attitude was like, well, we warned you. So they repeated it a couple of times and nobody moved. And of course, we were prepared for this. So they said, well, we warned you, you won't move, okay, everybody's under arrest. And then they turned and they looked around at the lunch counter again, and the second wave of students had all taken seats. And they were confounded. They kind of looked at each other like, now what do we do, you know? And they said, well, okay, we'll arrest those two. And they did it. And then the third wave. And no matter what they did and how many they arrested, there was still a lunch counter full of students there.
Peace, quiet, and good order will be maintained in our city to the best of our ability. Riots, melees, and disturbances of the peace are against the interest of all our people, and therefore cannot be permitted.
The local black community began to unite behind the students. Black merchants supplied food to those in jail. Homeowners put up property for bail money. The court found the students guilty of disorderly conduct. John Lewis refused to pay the $50 fine. He chose 33 days in the city workhouse instead. Most of the other students joined him in jail. To fight the jailing of their children, parents turned to the power of their own pocketbooks. In Nashville, in 1960, black buying power was estimated at $50 million a year, with $10 million spent in the downtown stores alone. Within a month, the boycott by black customers was almost completely effective. April 19th, dynamite thrown from a passing car at 5:30 in the morning destroyed the home of Z. Alexander Luby, one of Nashville's black city councilmen and defense attorney for the arrested students. The blast was so powerful it shattered 147 windows in Meharry Medical College across the street. Miraculously, no one was killed.
It was such an outrageous act that it could be very useful to a nonviolent movement then to move. Okay? It was a uniting of the city, but the outcome would be decided by how we, in fact, channeled that energy, right? And we then had the first major march of the movement. People began to gather, and we began to march, and students came out from the lunchrooms, and they came out from being on the campus grounds, and they joined, and they came out of buildings and dormitories. We filled Jefferson Avenue. It's a long, long way down Jefferson. After a while, there was a certain bit of singing, and as we came closer to town, it was merely the silence of the feet.
Face to face on the steps of City Hall, Reverend C.T. Vivian condemned the mayor for his failure to speak out in the past. Diane Nash pushed Ben West to take a personal stand.
We needed him to say integrate the counters, or to tell Nashville to do what Nashville knows it should have done a long time ago, like about 95 years ago after the Civil War. So I asked the mayor, first of all, Mayor West, do you feel that it's wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of his race or color?
And I tried as best I could to answer it, frankly and honestly, that I could not agree that it was morally right for someone to sell them merchandise and refuse them service. And I had to answer it just exactly that way. Of course, I received considerable criticism for it, but had I to answer it again, I would answer it in the same way again, because it was a moral question and was one that a man has to answer and not a politician.
3 weeks after Ben West's statement on the steps of City Hall, Black customers were served for the first time at lunch counters in downtown stores. On April 15, 1960, more than 200 veterans of the sit-in movement from Nashville and from other cities around the country gathered in Raleigh, North Carolina. Some suggested they joined the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, led by Dr. Martin Luther King. But SCLC's executive director, Ella Baker, advised the students to remain independent.
Ella Baker was very important, giving direction to the student movement in terms of really seeing how important it was to recognize the fact that the students should set the goals and directions and maintain control.
They formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and began organizing black communities throughout the South.
Freedom, freedom.
In November of 1961, a federal agency ordered the desegregation of all facilities used for interstate travel. Charles Sherrod sent students into a bus station in Albany, Georgia, to see if local authorities would arrest them.
Some of us really didn't think they would get arrested because this was a federal mandate. They mess with us now, but they were going to get the federal government on them, you know. Nobody was going to mess with the federal government, we thought.
The students were arrested. During the next 2 months, Sherrod and other members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee helped Albany organize against all forms of segregation.
And we just push pressure. Now, sometimes we don't know who controls this, who controls the other. So we stomp around and stomp and see whose feet we get. And then somebody's going to holler, "Oh, you got me." So then when he hollers, that's the direction we go in.
Youth and music provided the driving force for the struggle as never before.
Most of the mass meeting was singing in Albany. There was more singing than was talking. And so most of the work that was done in terms of taking care of movement business had to do with nurturing the people who had come. And there would be 2 or 3 people who would talk, but basically song was the bed of everything.
You want to know what the Negro in Albany is going to do? He's going to do whatever is necessary to ensure his freedom.
Dr. William G. Anderson was president of the Albany Movement, an umbrella organization formed to coordinate all the civil rights groups in the community. Dr. Anderson became concerned when more than 500 demonstrators had been jailed.
These were common, ordinary, everyday people, housewives, cooks, maids, laborers, children out of school. We had made no provisions for these people going to jail because we did not anticipate the mass arrest. So we concluded that night that we are into something that really we need some expert help in.
Dr. Anderson invited Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. to help in Albany. King brought with him the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Well, in Albany, we were like firefighters. The fire was already burning, and I try to say this as charitably as I can. SNCC was in over its head, and they wanted the international and national attention that Martin Luther King's presence would generate, but they did not want the input of his organization.
When Dr. King would come in, we'd get 2,000 or 3,000 people without much effort, so that was in our favor. But when he left, it was more difficult for us to get people to come. So that this phenomena of Doc flying into places where we worked and then flying out to another place, which was needed, made it difficult for us to organize.
As SNCC and SCLC struggled to work together, they hoped to fill Albany's jail until city officials had no choice but to meet their demands.
All right, let's stop it right here.
But Albany's chief of police, Laurie Pritchett, understood that goal and planned accordingly.
You're welcome to picket, but this grouping up here is going to stop. They'll be allowed 2 here in this block, and the others will move out.
I had sat down and took a map and went 15 miles, how many jails was in a 15-mile radius, how many was in a 30-mile radius, on up to maybe 50 or 60-mile radius. And I'd contacted those authorities. They'd assured us that we could use their facilities. And we had, when the mass arrest started, we'd have marches, and there'd be 200, 300. At one time there, I think we had almost 2,000, but none in our jail.
Martin Luther King was among the demonstrators who were arrested. In July of 1962, Dr. King began serving a 45-day sentence, determined to remain in jail to protest Albany's segregation. 3 days later, he was released. A stunned Dr. King explained that someone had mysteriously paid the fine.
At which time the chief said to us that we had been released. In other words, that our fine had been paid. I said, well, Chief, we want to serve this time. His only response then was, God knows, Reverend, I don't want you in my jail.
I knew that if he stayed in jail, we'd continue to have problems. So I talked to some people. I said, we've got to get him out. And once we do, I think he'll leave here. And arrangements were made. Frankly, I don't know who the man was that paid the bond.
But it was done at your request?
Yes, it was done at my request. And it sort of surprised Dr. King. This is one time, only time I've ever seen him when he seemed, where he didn't know which way to go.
Dr. King realized there would be no clear-cut victories in Albany. He was depressed as he left the city, which remained as segregated as it was when he first arrived.
I'm under orders to keep walking.
Now, I can't help how Dr. King might have felt, or Wyatt T. might have felt, or Bernard Lee, or any of the rest of them in SCLC, NAACP, or CORE, any other groups would felt. But as far as we were concerned, things moved on. We didn't skip one beat.
The ministers of SCLC left Albany, but they took with them some important lessons that would define future campaigns.
The strength of the Albany movement was it was perhaps the first time in this period of struggle of black people that we had mobilized an entire community against segregation. And secondly, we learned that valid and crucial lesson that you must pinpoint your targets so that you do not dilute the strength of your attack.
I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
On January 14th, 1963, these words made Alabama Governor George Wallace the symbol of Southern resistance. That spring, The Southern Christian Leadership Conference targeted the largest city in his state for a major confrontation.
Coming out of Albany, which was what many people consider not a victory, they needed a victory. Dr. King's image at this time was slightly on the wane because he had not projected. I say, I assure you, if you come to Birmingham, this movement can not only gain prestige, but really shake the country.
Birmingham, Alabama was known for its strict segregation and racial hatred, a city that some called Bombingham because of many bomb attacks against blacks. City officials were staunch segregationists. The most ardent foe of the civil rights movement was the Commissioner of Public Safety, Theophilus Eugene Connor, Bull Connor, whose opinions earned him election to 6 terms.
The so-called Negro movement is a part of the attempted takeover of our country by the lazy, the indolent, the beatniks, the ignorant, and by some misguided religionists and bleeding hearts, and all being led by the politicians who stay in office by appealing, remember, not to reason, but to the most votes.
Yes, we wanna
April 1963, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference planned to desegregate downtown stores and to show the nation the face of Southern racism. But only a few in Birmingham responded to SCLC's call for massive demonstrations.
And the black business community and some of the white clergy were pressuring us to call off the demonstrations and just get out of town. We didn't know what to do. And he sat there in room 30 in the Gaston Motel, and Martin didn't say anything. And then finally, he got up and he went in the bedroom, and he came back with his blue jeans on and his jacket, and he said, look, he said, I don't know what to do. He said, I just know that something has got to change in Birmingham. I don't know whether I can raise money to get people out of jail. I do know that I can go into jail with them. And not knowing how it was going to work out, he walked out of the room and led a demonstration and went to jail. That was, I think, the beginning of his true leadership.
At this time, local white clergy were criticizing King and the campaign.
The ministers published in the newspapers a diatribe against Martin, calling him a troublemaker and saying that he was there stirring up trouble to get publicity. And he sat down and took that newspaper, and he had no paper, and he was in solitary confinement. And he started writing an answer to that one-page ad around the margins of the New York Times.
For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied.
8 days later, King accepted release on bond to plan the next phase of the demonstrations. That plan would be the most controversial yet.
We wanted to get the black community in Birmingham involved, and the way you get people involved is get their children involved.
They were taking the kids out of school, marching, and I thought that was unnecessary. In fact, my idea was the kids, many of them didn't know what it was all about to start with.
On May 2nd, the children began to march in Birmingham. At first, the groups were small. Policemen arrested them, loaded them in police wagons, and took them away to Birmingham jail. As more children joined the march, police called in school buses to haul the demonstrators to jail. By the end of the day, 700 children had been arrested.
Most adults have bills to pay, house notes, rents, car notes, utility bills, but the young people, wherein they can think at the same level, are not at this point hooked with all those responsibilities. So a boy from high school, he get the same effect in terms of being in jail, in terms of putting pressure on the city as his father, and yet he's not, there's no economic threat on the family because the father's still on the job.
The next day, more than 1,000 children stayed out of school and gathered to march from the 16th Street Baptist Church. Bull Connor tried to stop the marches before they began and brought out the city's police dogs. Next, the fire department was brought in and Bull Connor ordered water hoses turned on the demonstrators. With 100 pounds of pressure per square inch, the water hit with enough force to knock the bark off trees. As water pounded the demonstrators, David Vann was on the phone with A.G. Gaston.
And then he said to me, he said, but Lawyer Vann, said, they've turned fire hoses on a little black girl. They're rolling that little girl right in the middle of the street now. I can't talk to you no more.
That, it was it, and standing up on my building looking down on Bull Connor and them shooting water in the park right across from my office there in that park. I guess that's the most outstanding thing in my mind right now. I just couldn't imagine what could happen.
The conflict gained national attention and news coverage of the event shocked the American public.
And it was a masterpiece of the use of media to explain a cause to the general public of a nation. Because in those days you had 15 minutes of national news and 15 minutes of local news. And in marching only one block, they could get enough news film to fill all of the newscasts of all of the television stations of the United States.
Photographs appeared in newspapers throughout the world, and the Birmingham story was told in many languages. The Russian newspaper Pravda ran a cartoon of police intimidating a black child. The federal government worried about America's image in other parts of the world. Governor Wallace saw it differently.
I will never be concerned about the attitude. In the first place, the average man in Africa and Asia doesn't even know where he is, much less where Alabama is.
On the 5th day of the children's campaign, the confrontation moved to the downtown area. Once again, Bull Connor summoned his firemen. With no place to run, no trees for protection, the demonstrators were hit with the full force of the water.